Welcome to Mom and Mind, where we dive into all aspects of perinatal mental health and wellness related to pregnancy, birth, loss, postpartum, and new parenthood. It's so much more than postpartum depression. We raise the volume on all of these topics in the hopes that someday everyone will have the support and info that they deserve before they need it. Please note this podcast is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Welcome to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In our episode today, we are going to be touching on a topic that concerns a lot of people and really is high stress for a lot of people, and that is colic. If your baby has had colic, then you know exactly what we're talking about. But if you've heard of colic and you're not quite sure what that means, you're not alone. A lot of people don't know what it means. And colic can encapsulate quite a few things that a baby could be going through. But very specifically, it's long periods of crying and a lot of difficulty being soothed. Our guest today, Jacqueline Del Vecchio, is going to share her story and experience with colic with her first child, and then the symptoms and triggers that led to postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. She's going to talk about how this experience really affected her and her mental health, as well as pushed her into specializing in perinatal mental health. Jackie Del Vecchio is a licensed mental health counselor in Salem, Massachusetts. She works in a private practice setting and specializes in perinatal mental health, certified through PSI. She's a wife, a mother of two, and as well as a mom to a chocolate lab. Let's hear from Jackie. Welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I just know that so many people will be able to resonate with your story before even hearing it, because I hear about colic so much and how hard it is and how it contributes to, anxiety and depression. So I'm really happy to have you here to share this so that others out there can know that they're not alone and be able to find ways to cope.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough one.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So go ahead and start wherever you'd like with your story.
Great. So 2016, we had our first child, who was our daughter, and I had a great pregnancy, actually really loved being pregnant, some heartburn here or there, but overall, everything was great. I actually felt better being pregnant than not. So that all went smooth. The birth all went smooth. Everything was fine. So the second day in the hospital, like when it was the middle of the night and the nurses were bringing her back to the room to feed, I heard one say, "Wow, she's a really colic baby." Oh, and I was like half asleep. And this was day 2. And I didn't really know anything about colic at that point. And my husband had gone home to be with the dog. So he wasn't there that night. And I was like, that's weird. But I just kind of was in and out. I obviously was on minimal sleep. I didn't think anything of it until we got home. And so it was pretty smooth the first day or two home. We kind of expected, that she would sleep a lot because she's a new baby and eat and poop and all that. But it started very quickly where she was crying all day. And this was in the first week of her life. And so typically, if people don't know much about colic, is, it usually will start to peak around, 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks, not usually the first few days. And so we were just really confused. And is this what it's like? Do they just cry a lot? So right. It went on for a while. And so we went in with the PCP and we talked to her. And I actually looked back at the records because me and my husband had, we couldn't remember it correctly because it was such a blur for us back then, right, that I looked back at the records, and it was day 9 that our pediatrician basically said, it was colic and kind of what to expect. So it was diagnosed pretty early. I mean, the nurses caught it day 2, apparently, which is unheard of. So it lasted probably close to 7 months. When the doctor said, the first 3 or 4 months, usually is typically what it is. It was not 3 or 4 months, And so it's also it's tough because you don't even know what it is. Is it, right, gastrointestinal? Is it just an unexplained thing where babies cry constantly and barely anything soothes them? It's just so confusing because there's not concrete information out there.
Right.
So in that time, in those 7 months, we went to the doctors. She was on reflex medications. We had multiple formula changes. I mean, I gave up. I could not deal with the pumping and the breastfeeding because it was just too much, too much crying. And she was just in pain after every time she ate. She loved to eat, but after every bottle, it was inconsolable, the typical back arching, clenching. So nothing would help in the beginning. So we went through lots of different specialty formulas, went to a gastro and, intestinal doctor for her. And we finally ended up on, a regimen but by that time she was like six months. So, it was older that her system was, maturing a little bit more anyways, so where they say usually it's like the sphincter muscles that mature by 1 year old, that's when they typically have a lot less trouble with the digesting and the reflux. So I was thinking, oh my God, I can't wait till a year. Yeah. But it ended up being, close to, 7 months. And so in that time, I mean, really the only things that brought some relief or peace for her, to calm down was we would bounce on a yoga ball, like a yoga ball for hours at a time. Oh man. And that's how, I know it was a good workout though, to be honest. It was, I got my core back by doing that, but that's how she had to nap. That's how we had to do, like anytime anybody was over, they had to bounce with her on the ball to even hold her so she wouldn't cry.
Oh man.
So that we found that, and then the sound of the vacuum. So sometimes we would just have to, I don't know why it works, but sometimes the sound of the vacuum in the background would actually kind of reduce, her screams as well, and then just a funny one was the song, Justin Timberlake song, Can't Stop the Feeling. We have, video proof of her, absolutely inconsolable. I put that song on and she would stop. But the second the song came back, stopped, she went right back to doing what she was doing.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it lasted about 7 months and it was definitely challenging. And I don't even think we were in survival mode. So I don't even think we really knew what hit us in those 7 months.
So, I mean, if you can, for people who don't know much about colic, can you walk us through like a typical day of how often she's crying, what you're trying to do to soothe her, how you feel while she's crying?
Absolutely. So, a lot of colic babies, they actually are crying all through the night and don't sleep through the night. But she was the opposite. She would cry all day, and our saving grace was that she slept through the night.
Oh,
So like I said, once again, it's sometimes just confusing. It doesn't really make sense. But so a typical day would be, she would be fine when she woke up. But the second she had her bottle, we knew, okay, the next 2 hours, we're going to be bouncing on a ball. We're going to be, doing all these things and trying to stop it until it was the next feeding time. And she was great when she was feeding. She loved food. She would be good probably for about 15 minutes. But then after 15 minutes of eating, it would start the cycle all over again. So it was basically all day. And so it was very isolating because we didn't want to take her anywhere. We didn't want to, we didn't want it to like feeding time and know that as soon as we fed her, then she would be, inconsolable, and we didn't want to be anywhere at somebody's house. So we tend to just kind of, stay home a lot and just deal with it. And so it felt, like I said, it felt very isolating, and it was a very helpless feeling because, the expectation is that, or even just the idea of parenting is you have a baby, they're going to cry because they're hungry or they're tired or they need to have their diaper changed, and then they're okay. But that's not true for everybody. And so we would meet all of those needs and it wouldn't matter. So it was very helpless of, what can I do? I'm doing all these things that they're saying and nothing's helping this poor baby who's in pain. And so the big thing that I think was my number one symptom was guilt. And it didn't necessarily make any sense. I mean, it does now looking back at it, but I just felt guilty for everything. I felt guilty for anybody coming over and had to like listen to that or had to bounce on the ball just to spend time with her. I felt guilt that they had to listen to it, guilt that I couldn't go out, or I didn't want to go out because I didn't want, and so I didn't realize how much guilt was a symptom until I came out of it. I was like, wow, I don't actually have to feel guilty for these things. And so it was like really eye-opening to know that like guilt was such a big component of that.
Right. And not just for a short bit of time. I mean, that's the months.
Yeah.
Months of feeling bad. Oh,
and I didn't know I felt bad for a while. It took me 5 months in. That's when I talked to a really good colleague and friend of mine. And I said, I need to talk to somebody, I'm like, this is, and I mean, I obviously waited way too long, but I wasn't grasping it. Like I wasn't recognizing it because I was in survival mode. And so we were just doing what we needed to do. We were new parents. It wasn't recognized. But there was one day that hit me and I was feeding her in her room and she was super quiet and it wasn't like a time of screaming but it was the silence that I was like, oh man, I really, really need to talk to somebody about this. This is not normal. Like, this is not okay. Mm-hmm. And I think it started then because it wasn't as bad as the first few months. It was still like a lot and most of the day. But I think because she started to like get a little bit more calmer, I had more time to think and I had more time to kind of reflect on what the heck just happened? Like, what is going on? So that is when I was like, okay, now that like we're slowly getting out of this, I need to take care of myself.
So what did you come to find was happening for you?
So as far as like symptoms, you mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep. So definitely, like I said, the guilt, I would just cry. I was sitting in my mom's house one time and we were trying to get her to nap because she was we had to hold her for her naps for 6 months. And they were trying to put her in the bassinet and everybody's trying to give their suggestions and just trying to help out. And, hey, did you try this? Or what about this? And, I felt like people obviously like didn't really understand. We were trying everything and I know they were trying to help, but that would make me feel worse too, because it's like shame. It's like, no, like, oh my God, I'm not trying these things, or am I not doing a good job? Should I be doing something different? So I remember sitting in her house and I just like hysterically started crying. She's like, what's the matter? And I was like, I don't know. I just feel so guilty about everything. And she just wasn't sure, what to say. So definitely tearfulness, guilt, trying like isolating a little just because it was just too much to even think about handling in public.
Yeah.
And definitely anger. I mean, I was very jealous of seeing other people with their babies out and about who are not inconsolably crying. And so I felt like I was robbed, and I felt like very sad that my first experience, like I was missing out, and my therapist, I said to her one day, I said, I just feel really sad for, like, we barely have any pictures of my daughter with anybody when she was a baby, because you just couldn't really get them. There's like a few, like ones that we really cherished that she's smiling and it's like wonderful. But I just feel so bad for my family that they just don't have these pictures of her, like being able to hold a tiny, cute little baby, So I felt really sad about all the, like, almost like a grief feeling.
Yeah.
I felt like I was missing out, on a lot of things.
All right. I mean, there is so much time and effort and energy spent on just trying to figure out what was wrong or what was going on with her and problem solving. How could you have time to really settle in and think about, how it's affecting you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was definitely like a full-time job, trying to just constantly, either go to doctors or try different things and see what works. And it was a lot, and I actually was surprised. Like, it took me probably a year or two to really figure out how traumatic it was too. Like now that I've learned more and, have gotten more, which we'll get to, but more training in perinatal mental health, it was very traumatic for me. I mean, I would have flashbacks anytime I heard a baby crying in the way that, there's a very specific colic cry. It's very, very distressing.
What is that? I mean, not that I want you to make that sound, but what does it sound like? And what does it do to you?
So it's like really high pitched, people actually compare it to kind of like a dinosaur, like a velociraptor, pterodactyl type noise. And I remember we said it one day that it sounded like that. And then when we were doing research, of course, people were like, oh yeah, that's the, the colic cry. And we're like, oh no, so, and it just goes straight to your bones. And, I remember reading an article that babies crying are like top 2 or 3 distressing sounds that, one can hear, and so, and that's a normal baby cry, never mind one that is, ongoing for hours at a time. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, it's really hard.
Sure. I mean, I imagine like a panic feeling for you, whenever that happens, at least in the beginning, because you're just, did it feel panicky for you?
Yeah, it's so hard to like put a word to it, definitely panicky, definitely, like I said, just like this helpless feeling, and you're just like so sensitive to it, but you're also very frustrated, and I think that's hard for people to admit is, you don't want to be mad at your baby for crying, but we're also human, and it's hard to listen to that for hours on end with nothing that you can do. And so it does get to you.
Did you experience like irritability or rage or anything with that?
Definitely irritability. I don't know if I would classify it, as rage. I think I would just more go inward and just cry. And I would just like put myself in a different realm, take a break and just more tearfulness, but definitely we were snappy with each other because it's just, it's just a lot of tension, and a lot of anxiety. So definitely irritable. And I think it actually caused me to be quite cynical and kind of projecting it. And so like when parents or people would say, oh, this is going to be awesome. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Just wait and see, which now looking back, I'm like, I hate that I did that, but it was what I was going through. Of course, my experience, I was projecting that out because mine was not as awesome as I expected it to be. It was not what I had envisioned with my child. So it was tough, kind of being negative in that sense because everybody's experience is different. So I can't really say that theirs wasn't going to be. So that negativity part definitely came with, I'm sure, the jealousy and just being sad.
Right. You just spoke about all the expectations and hopes that you had for parenthood, and this was not it. Obviously, those first 7 months at least were not it. And I imagine there's some grief in that too. Just that this is not what I wanted this to be like.
For sure. Yeah. Like I said, in the beginning, you're thinking, okay, I can handle this. I'm not going to sleep for a while.
Right.
They'll cry. Well, these are the things that you do. But I'm going to love my baby so much. It's not going to matter. And unfortunately, like I said, that doesn't always go that way. You're like, whoa, what is this? Why is nothing that I'm doing helping? My baby's rejecting me. I'm not able to soothe them. I can't help them. Like all of these kind of like shameful thoughts just go through your head when you cannot help your baby. And so I've learned, of course, that you are helping your baby, even if they're still crying, and being there to comfort and hold and soothe them in other ways. I mean, I know that I was doing a lot for her, but she just couldn't tell me at that part, so it was not very rewarding
Right.
because, I wasn't getting that, hey, you're doing a great job, mom,
Right.
I'm going to be okay. So you can't get that
No.
from an infant. But so the expectation of that was very different, which I think for most things in life, right, is when we have those and it doesn't happen, it's pretty hard to adjust to that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Very difficult. So this was a long chunk of time too. After you said around 7 months, she started to feel a bit better. And what happened for you? What was your process through this?
So I think being a therapist, I think that was actually kind of a barrier for me because I'm thinking in my head, I'm a therapist. I know all these skills. I'm very, trained in them. I teach people them, like I can handle this. I shouldn't be having a difficult time with this. So it took me a while to really actually admit that, which is when, I sought a therapist. So it was hard for me to recognize that.
Yeah.
And I think being a therapist definitely made it more difficult. I think other things that kind of made it harder was, even with the doctors, we would go, like, even on that day 9 when we brought her, it was like, yeah, it sounds like colic, and that was it. And I'm like, no, hey, listen, you're going to be struggling, this is what it's really like, and like no information or even like a heads up about what that is like. And this is definitely something that can trigger and cause so much anxiety and depression for people, especially if it's not talked about or, understood. We just went home thinking, okay, what does that mean?
Oh, man. Wow. Yeah. Super, super challenging. But really, obviously there's not enough resources to help you or people don't know about them.
Exactly. It's kind of like, well, it's temporary and there's nothing actually wrong with your baby. So like, there's no harm that's coming of it. There's, it is temporary. So it's kind of like, poo-pooed, which I know is a bigger picture of how, mothers, there's not enough resources or even attention, put on them. So that's a totally different, subject, but colic in general, I mean, it was very minimized, which I think, did not help us at all, be able to kind of process that as we went along. Because even when we went to the specialist, she's like, yeah, you could switch the formula if you want to, but I don't really think you need to. And so we pushed for it because all we did was research and advocate. And we're like, no, we got to do something. We cannot do this anymore. And so we did switch a formula. And there was actually a big significant change after doing that. She wasn't spitting up as much and she definitely seemed a lot more comfortable. So I'm really glad we pushed for that. But even the specialist was like, no, I think you'll be fine.
Wow. Okay. Right. So for people who are on the ground, so to speak, dealing with this day to day, I imagine hearing somebody say there's nothing wrong with your child and you hear the screeching every day that sounds like something's wrong with my child. And for it to be explained away in a sense, gosh, that must be frustrating. But it leaves you feeling like, okay, well, I guess I got to figure this out by myself or by ourselves.
Right. And so that I think also led to all right, I guess this is just normal. Right. So it also was like, okay, maybe I don't need help. Maybe this is just what it's like. And I just remember thinking constantly, like, how do people have multiple children? How do they do this? This is really, really awful sometimes. And so, not realizing that that's not everybody's experience, but, it was challenging. And even like with friends and, sometimes they would really try to help and they would say, oh yeah, no, my baby's been super fussy today too. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, little different, but, and I don't want to take away from their experience either,
right.
Because, anytime a baby is fussy, it's really distressing, but that kind of kept me away sometimes too, because I'm like, no, you don't understand what I
Right.
mean by fussy. This isn't just fussy. Like, this
Right.
is a painful, distressing, inconsolable experience. And it's
Sure.
draining, very draining.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So there you are as a therapist thinking I should be able to deal with this and not getting help, but then also feeling not like you have to defend yourself to other people, but geez, they just don't get it. Yeah, that's so hard. So how did you eventually get to a point where you said, okay, I'm going to get help now?
Yeah. I mean, after those first 5 months, I think the cliche phrases that come up for a lot of moms is just like, I just didn't feel myself.
Yeah.
I was not happy. I wanted nothing to think about. Like, I did not want to think about having another kid ever again.
Hmm.
Like, I was not
Hmm.
enjoying that experience. And like I said, the guilt piece just was too much. Like, I felt bad for people watching her. I felt bad for not letting people watch her. I felt,
Yeah.
so it was just a constant battle in my head all day. And so I reached out to one of my good friends, and I just said, please, do you have anyone? Like, I really, really need to talk to somebody. Um, and so, then I started weekly therapy, which was absolutely great. I needed that, and I
Yeah.
needed that space. I mean, even in then, I would cry most of the session, in the
Hmm.
beginning, and be able to get that out and just process some of it was definitely amazing.
What was your experience with therapy? How did it help you? Obviously, you said the processing through stuff, which is actually huge. People, I don't think, give enough credit to talking through things. That's incredibly relieving. But in addition to that, what else did you find that was helpful?
I think normalizing a lot of it. Yeah, I think I had a lot of, different shameful thoughts, or, like, I'm a bad mom, or am I doing this right? Like, to be able to normalize so many things that were in my head that I was thinking, I'm the only mom who's thinking this, who I'm the
Right.
only mom who, some days wants to run away and not be a mom anymore. I
Right.
realized that that was not true. That
Hmm.
happens all the time.
Hmm.
And that's okay, because it's, in that moment, it means that we're just too overwhelmed and we need a break.
Yeah.
And, like, we need something, like, there are other needs not being met at that time. So,
Right.
to be able to, like, take those thoughts and make sure that we're not, interpreting it in a specific way, right? Thoughts are just thoughts. So being able to normalize them and realize that they can come and go and don't necessarily mean anything about our ability to be a mom was really huge. And I think the biggest lesson was that we are all on the same level. And
Hmm.
so I had put myself on a higher level as being a therapist, but I was forgetting that I'm just a human too,
Mm.
right? Because I was thinking, my profession, I have to be able to do this. And so I think that was the best lesson for me, is that, nope, we're all humans,
Yeah.
and you can
Yeah.
be trained in anything. But
Right.
when we go through a traumatic or challenging experience, you're going to experience the same emotions just as anybody. And you may need that extra support or self-care during that time. And it does not exclude you because you're
Right.
trained in the field.
All right. So you were already a therapist, not quite specializing yet. What led you finally just to start specializing?
That experience 100%, because once again, it was something I just did not expect. And it led me to feel so sad for all the parents out there
Yeah.
that are faced with things that they just did not picture, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's a child being sick, or, whatever it may come, that unexpected thing that happens, and how difficult it can be to, accept, to deal with. And so I really wanted to be more educated on kind of how to help moms, dads, parents, whoever it may be, caring for these babies, of making sure that they know they're not alone. There's a lot of
Right.
support out there. And, most 99% of the time, your thoughts are pretty normal. It's just what we do with them. So I wanted to, to be able to be that person to help normalize it for them and help them prepare for certain things that may come, and just share that journey with them, because parenting is darn challenging.
It sure is. Right. Right. So what have you learned along the way about the effects of colic on parents?
That it's definitely not researched enough.
Yeah.
But that it absolutely is a trigger to it. And when something is not either researched or just kind of looked over, it's very hard to convince people like, hey, no, this is actually something pretty, challenging and traumatic. Because if it's not like on paper somewhere, then it's not true. But
right.
it so definitely leading to the depression and anxiety and long periods of it, of course. Because once again, it goes back to how distressing something is. And if we're exposing ourselves to it for hours and hours a day and not getting help, it's 100% going to impact us, our mood. So I wish there was more out there, but it absolutely is a factor, and it does come up in the, risk factors, especially of for second children. If you had it, if you experienced it in the first child, it can kind of be one of those factors that can contribute to postpartum depression or anxiety the second time around.
Oh, sure. If you have two colicky kiddos, or just even the postpartum, even if the second child isn't colicky, I wonder.
Yeah, I think it was more, like already having a baby that did have colic can make it more likely that you'll experience it, among other things. But it's kind of lower on the list. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely one thing I learned, is that there needs to be a lot more research out there.
What are your tips for parents who are dealing with colic now? And I mean, obviously you have your own experience, and it sounds like therapy and support is really useful. But in what way do you help other people with this now?
Is a lot of self-care, which I mean, this is a very general term, but what I mean by that is making sure that parents have their time, even if it's a 5, 10, 15-minute break where you can step away. And whether that's accepting, I think a big one is people learning to accept help from others. And because we definitely need a village when it comes to that. And I know this year has made it very challenging for people to have a village, because we're supposed to be staying away from everybody. But so being able to so definitely skills on asking for help, but also accepting it. And because we are offered help a lot, and no, that's okay, which I did the same thing, because I felt too bad. And I don't want you to listen to her crying for an hour. Well, you know what? Other people, they get to go home. 1 hour of their life is nothing. You deal with it for hours and hours a day. So they're going to be okay. And they're not going to experience it in the same way that we are. Right. So being able to ask and accept for help, to be able to educate themselves for sure, and advocate for themselves, much like with the doctors and whatnot, and like I said, self-care, taking breaks, making sure you have time to exercise, or at least, get out for walks, fresh air, not doing it in the house where the baby is crying, because you want to be able to separate, if you can, from that, because otherwise it's just going to continue to be more distressing and really counterintuitive to what you're looking for.
It seems like it is so overstimulating to have the constant cry, or even if it's not 24/7, if it's at least half the day or whatever, just having your nervous system be like, I can't take it anymore.
Exactly.
Because we're not built to, to be on that level of vigilance and alarm all the time really does a number on just your nervous system. Keeps you fried.
It sure does. It sure does. And even afterwards, we had a second child, and we were so hypervigilant and sensitive to anything. I would have flashbacks anytime he would cry, like just a normal cry,
Yeah.
but like anytime he would cry, all right, is this starting? Is it starting? I mean, I think that like we waited until like the fourth or fifth week to finally say like, I think we're going to be okay. Or
Mm.
even if we're not, it's not going to be like it was before when it
Yeah.
started day 2.
Right.
Because I asked the nurse in the hospital on day 2 with him, and I said, how was he? Was he crying all night? Like, how was it? And she's like, oh no, he was totally fine. And I explained the story to her, and she's like, no, they can't tell if they're colic day 2. I'm like, oh, well, they definitely said it, and they were definitely true. So, I mean, they were definitely right. So I just kept double checking, and we were just so anxious for weeks, just waiting and seeing if he was also going to be colic, but he was not. And but we were very prepared this time around, which I think is another thing that I like to help people with, is being very prepared with a plan. Like, what are you going to do this time around to really take care of yourself?
Well, that makes so much sense, and it sounds doable in terms of the the tips and the ways that you are supporting people. It's not some far out thing that you're suggesting that people do. This is, I mean, gosh, it would be nice to do this all the time in preparing for babies, but certainly, I mean, that's such an experience that you had as a family to be just on edge like that for so long.
Yeah. So the besides, therapy for me, of course, it was the planning for the second child and what I was going to do differently this time. And because I knew what I did last time, which was really nothing, was not going to cut it. And so I had a really, really good plan of support and, exercise and all of these things that really, really made it a lot easier for me this time around. So I took care of myself, and I asked for help, and I accepted help, and I had all these plans. And so it was a significant, difference from the first time around, because I knew what to expect just in case, I knew that it could, not be so pleasant. And so I had all angles covered.
Great. Yeah. I'm hopeful that you sharing your experience through this, for the people out there who are listening, who are either worried about their baby having colic or going through it themselves, can hear so clearly that there are actionable steps, even if it's not that, specifically that your baby will stop crying or be in pain. But man, all the stuff you've done around that to help yourself is, takes the edge off, helps you be able to still be there for them like you want to be. Yeah. And just want everybody to know they're doing a wonderful job, even if your baby does not stop crying. That does not, equate to you being a good parent or not, which is a really, really important lesson, so that affection and comfort and all of that makes a big difference. So, there are a lot of things to do to make it easier on yourself, not necessarily, like I said, the baby crying less, but we need to take care of ourselves even more because of that. Absolutely. Is there anything else you want to say to people, hopeful messages, or do you feel like you got those in too?
So yeah, my intention, of course, is to not scare anybody about the 7 months. I want you to know that there is help out there. And there are a lot of practical ways to help ourselves really, a lot of self-care, self-soothing, and a lot of processing on our own to be able to just get that support a little bit more. And I waited too long, and not too long. I waited long enough that it took a little bit longer for me to be able to get that together. So my suggestion is, even new parents who aren't experiencing this, it's great to get that support and to talk to people, because it's a new experience. And anytime we're in a new transition, or it's hard to adjust to that, and we're new at it, so we're not supposed to know what to do. And so that support and that help is great anyways. So I think it's a hopeful thing. Yes, it's a temporary thing with colic, but it's challenging, and we have that support out there. We just have to accept it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for leaving us with that and that hope for parents that they can get through this too. I appreciate you sharing your experience with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again, Jackie, for being with us today and sharing your story and all of this great information with us. For those of you who'd like to get connected with her, go to JacquelineDelVecchio.com or find her on Instagram at ButLet'sBeRealistic. As usual, please share with at least one person who you know could benefit from this information and knowing that they're not alone. There are many, many families out there dealing with a baby who has colic and not sure what to do and not sure how to cope. And do remember to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't yet already. Thanks for being with us. Until next time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share this podcast. Together we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come connect with us at momandmind.com.